What's up, everyone? Welcome to RotoGrinders NBA. Technically crunch time because we're going right up until lock. As long as we got the questions from the chat today, we are joined by two of the sharpest minds in the biz. I am joined by two of the sharpest minds in the biz. We're all sharpest minds in the biz. First up, returning champion from last week, Kyle Murray. How you doing, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Excited to talk some hoops after a crazy game one. So hopefully game two can try to follow suit there. It's gonna be tough to beat or even match. But yeah, looking forward to talking about it with you guys.
We had a pretty solid read on game one, Kyle. We played a lot of Obi Toppin, played a lot of Andrew Nemhard, played a lot of Aaron Nesmith, loaded it up with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and we said, OKC should win. But if the Pacers get hot, they got a chance. And lo and behold, they won by one. They shot 47% from three, and they stole game one in OKC, helping us to break down game two. We got Mr. Turvey Bet himself, Jim Turvey. How you doing, Jim?
Good. Happy to be on. It's been a minute, but game two of the finals, I couldn't miss it. Game one was a blast. I was watching the game one preview. Guys pretty much nailed it. So hopefully we can run that back and provide the folks some good analysis here before game two.
I was looking at the something you should never do, but I thought it was hilarious because as I'm producing all these shows right now, I'm adjusting things on YouTube, making sure everything is set how it should be. And I saw the comments for our last show, and the first two on there were terrible takes, absolute trash. And then the next one was great analysis from these guys. You just got yourself a new subscriber. So the absolute quality from people on the first two comments on that one. But Jim, I'll throw it to you first. Game one in the books. Indiana stole it. What do you think is going to happen here in game two?
Yeah, honestly, if we ignore the actual end result of the game, which was a close Pacers win, I thought it pretty much went according to script. I thought it was Halliburton, had like pretty low usage. Siakam was solid. The Pacers kind of spread around the wealth. On the OKC side, it was a lot of Shea. It was J-Dub with some questionable open threes that didn't go down. It was Lou Dort hitting a couple of shots at home. The script was pretty much there. What was crazy was that fourth quarter where suddenly, OKC couldn't hit their shots. Indy could hit their shots, which both teams have done throughout the postseason. I saw game one is kind of, as someone who was on the Indy side in the series, I wasn't all that shocked. I think the script is there. Now, game two, you get the zigzag theory. The spread's out to 11 now. The market really, really wants to be on this OKC bounce back spot. We'll talk through it all, but I think it'll be another close game. Personally, I think it could be, a pretty similar script to game one. Now, maybe OKC gets it done this time, but I thought it was pretty much according to script, honestly.
This series reminds me a lot of the Heat Spurs matchup from, I think it was I can't remember if it was the first time they matched up or just the first time that the Spurs beat the Heat.
2014.
You had like the Heat side where it's like, this is the clear supposed to win side of things, a much better roster, especially on paper. Now, I don't know if OKC is quite at the level of LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, but pretty damn close. They're deeper than that team was anyways. And then you have a Pacers team that isn't quite as good, but they move the ball around really, really well. And they obviously play much faster than that Spurs team. But in a half-court setting, they remind me a lot of that Spurs offense, the way that they're constantly just firing the ball around the outside, looking for open looks. Nobody cares who gets the bucket. And as long as you're Danny Greens from that year, Aaron Nesmiths and Andrew Nemhard, as long as they're knocking down their shots, all of a sudden you can take down a juggernaut. Kyle, how about you? What do you think this game is going to how do you think it's going to play out?
Yeah, I think from looking at the market perspective, I think that it's pretty telling seeing the line move from 9.5 at the close of game one to 11.5 in this one. I think that narrative is sort of playing out in the market, which is quite telling. I do think the Thunder are gonna come out swinging here with multiple chips on their shoulders, that's for sure. But I think we talked about it before game one, like the idea of this, how a hot team can get from three could really decide this series. And that was the case in game one. Jim mentioned J-Dub missing a couple big threes that, a lot of times it's the guy you expect to make those shots. Didn't get to go, sure. We did see Lou Dort have probably his best game of his career, especially considering the magnitude of the game, 5 for 9 from 3. But you look on the other side with the Pacers, 46% from 3. It's probably not something you're going to continue to count on game in and game out, especially when you have several guys. Obi Toppin, obviously we liked him in game 1, 5 for 8 from 3. Probably not going to happen again. So I think that's going to be a really interesting dynamic to take part in coming into game 2, is seeing, is regression going to hit the Pacers hard from 3? I mean, we saw it play out that way pretty much for the first 3 quarters of the game. So we'll see how that goes from a 3-point shooting perspective. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic to think about, especially from a DFS perspective coming into game 2.
Well, let's start diving into it. We'll go through DraftKings first, FanDuel second, then we'll take your questions. We'll go through a couple builds, not full builds, but shells of some builds on each of these sites, talk about our favorite high-end plays, favorite cheap plays, and then, of course, we'll take some questions. If you got any questions, get them into the RotoGrinders live stream Discord chats. I'll be going there first, then I will be going to the YouTube chat second. All we ask is that you smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Let's dive into this. Kyle, let's start on DraftKings. Let's take a peek at SimLabs, and obviously SGA is, the guy. He is by far the most likely one to score the most fantasy points, but he's also really expensive, and Sims right now are showing that he's actually going a little over-owned at the captain position.
Yeah, I think, especially when you look at a lot of people who play Showdown consistently is in the NFL streets, and you don't have as much consolidation on ownership in the captain spot as you do in the NBA, especially in a series like this where you look at SGA, he's such a dynamic fantasy producer, and then on the Pacer side, like they're top guys. Like, yeah, we're not all that high on coming into this series, so it does apply a new interesting dynamic from an ownership perspective from the captain slot. Obviously, people are going to flock to SGA, but again, we talked about it in game 1 on DraftKings. There are just several ways to build around different captains within those slots. So obviously, yes, I think SGA is the optimal captain tonight. He's the safest option, the one that I think is rightfully so at this ownership projection. But also, again, I think most people who are playing Showdown aren't looking to chop prizes. They're looking to build unique lineups with as much positive EV built in as possible. And I do think that a lot of that comes from being unique, and that involves getting sort of different at the captain position. I say sort of because I don't think you need to go, off the wall. We don't need to be, diving down too deep in terms of the player pool for a captain option. But if you're looking to instantly get different, it's going to be by, getting away from SGA. But with that being said, it's hard to, use that as, solid advice, because SGA does project so much better than all of these guys, so much safer than all of these guys. So with that being said, SGA definitely the optimal guy again. I think it's the same take as in game 1. He's the optimal option. He's the safest option, but there are 3-4 options that you can definitely mix into your player pool for sure.
Looking at the projected ownerships and optimal percentages, I'm kind of feeling like my favorite pivot off of SGA in tournaments is once again going to be the Pascal Siakam captain lineups. I don't necessarily think I want to go super cheap, even looking at the guys like Obi Toppin. If you wanted to try it, you can already see that they're projecting to be quite over-owned at that position. Obviously, SGA is the cash style captain. Jim, how about you? Are you looking to eat the chalk with SGA there? Are you looking to differentiate at the captain?
Yeah, Kyle laid it out pretty well. It is really tough in this series when there is not only one player who's going to score at a point per minute level, like well beyond anyone else on the court, but it also is a good matchup, at least a solid matchup for him, and a really tough matchup for at least 2 of the 3 others. I think you're right in highlighting that Pascal is probably the one who doesn't have the toughest matchup. He was the second highest scorer for game 1 for fantasy points. So I think that is a decent one. The other name I'm looking at is J-Dub. He did have 19 field goal attempts. He only shot 6 of 19. He still had a decent game overall. But I do find myself keep coming back to Shea, even though, his optimum is lower than the ownership there. I mean, he took 30 field goal attempts, and you can script this multiple ways. I almost think that you can script it. Maybe talk about, specific lineup builds at some point as well. But in a tighter game, he's going to be pushing the action and getting those field goal attempts. But even if it's a blowout, I think he'll have a lot of assists, and it's more likely those other stats kind of pop up. He only had 3 assists in the first game. If those shooters on OKC are hitting their shots, leading to more of a blowout, he's going to be getting those assists. So he has such an insanely high floor that it's really tough in that captain spot to go elsewhere, even with the ownership being high. If you want to pivot, there are, I don't hate Siakam, I don't hate J-Dub, but I find myself coming back to Shea and then getting cute in the other spots, and hoping that, that's how you can differentiate a little bit better.
All right, well, let's pivot over to the utility spot. We will stay with you here, Jim. If we are building around SGA at that captain position, who would you be looking as kind of like your first couple utility pieces that you're going to need to have in there? Because obviously, if we're putting SGA captain, we will need to find some ways to save salary. Where are you going to be looking to go to do that first off?
Yeah, so, from that second tier of price guys, I do think Pascal and J-Bub, there is some interesting, really lower down price guys that, maybe can make a lineup with Shea and J-Dub potentially feasible, especially if you lean into kind of the OKC blowout option. You can put in some of their bench guys as well, and maybe that's all, just kind of stack up there. But from that middle tier, the guy who caught my eye, it's funny because watching the game, he very much did not pass the eye test. I was texting friends like, man, we got to get Miles Turner off the court. End of the game, he had 30 fantasy points. He was a +8 on the day. They played really well with him. And down the line, those offensive rebounds that Indy was able to get were a pretty big contributor to them getting the win in the end. I also think that, so he did that in 27 minutes. He had 30 points, 27 minutes. And here's the thing, Obi Toppin probably isn't going 5 for 9 again. So that could be a few less minutes for Obi Toppin, a few more minutes for Miles Turner. Even though I didn't honestly love what my eyes were telling me out there, he put up really good stats. And I think there's a path to him getting even more minutes. Now, there is also a path of OKC still going small and him being played off the court a little bit. But I think that's a narrower path. So I'm pretty interested there in Miles Turner in that secondary tier. And then maybe should I do one more name or throw it to Kyle and then come back to me for middle tier?
As many as you want, my friend.
Let's do the other guy I'm looking at is Isaiah Hartenstein. So these are almost tied together to a degree because the more Miles Turner plays, the more Hartenstein's going to play. The more Hartenstein plays, the more Miles Turner is going to play. So I really like putting both of these guys in a lineup together. Hartenstein had 22 fantasy points in the first game in 17 minutes. Those minutes were pretty low. We saw OKC kind of zag at the last second there, change their starting lineup that had gotten them to the finals. Took a lot of grief in the post game when, Kason Wallace was a -13 in his minutes. Pretty rough outing from him overall. Hartenstein on the plus side, he was a +2, had a really good game. And again, they got crushed on the glass at the end. They got, I think Indiana got 7 of the last 8 rebounds of the game or something. So, he was putting up a good per minute fantasy point total in game one. The rebounds are going to be there. This is a very small series in general. He can really rack up points. He's got pretty low ownership as well. And I think you can really tie him to Turner as well. And I'm really interested in both of them in kind of a zag off of the both teams going small game one. Didn't really work for OKC. I kind of see those minutes of the bigs, the more Hartenstein minutes, again, that means probably the more Turner minutes. So I really like putting the two of them together kind of in the middle of the lineup and then finding a little bit of value down the line there.
Just went to fiddle with some things and I realized my golf single entry lineup cashed and I kind of had forgotten that I even made a lineup. So that's fun. Kyle, how about you? Where are you looking to go at the utility spot?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think Jim made a great point about correlating your lineup with guys who might share minutes, especially when they're on the opposite teams. I mean, we talked about that in game one. That was probably the biggest miss I think for me from a minutes projection perspective was Hartenstein. Obviously, he only played 17 minutes, but when you look at the production, which we did outline, we discussed him being a good permanent guy and definitely someone who can, rack up fantasy points even in limited time on the floor. But Jim makes a great point about correlating these guys who, might be able to have minutes together. So I like that call on Turner and Hartenstein. In terms of the guys up top, obviously, I think Siakam, going back to him after game one, for me personally, I mean, he took 15 shot attempts, scored about 40 DK points. I think 15 shot attempts is going to be a low number for Siakam in this series. I think there's plenty of meat left on the bone there from a volume perspective for him, especially if he's playing mid-30s minutes. I project him to go over his point prop, which I believe was 17.5 or 18.5, depending on where you look. I like the over on that. So I like the over here again for Siakam, who we saw at times in the Cleveland series, at times in the New York series, where he's had this 20-plus shot attempt upside from the field. So don't mind, reaching for that again here with Siakam. Jalen Williams, obviously, rough game, especially when you look at where you're sort of expecting him to be that 1B option. Obviously, it's tough to be that, but I'm sure that's what he wants out of himself. But being that secondary option behind SGA from a scoring perspective, he was not able to do that, but got 19 shots up. Going back there, especially if you are building certain lineups without SGA in the captain spot, upgrading Jalen Williams, I do think makes some sense. So those are the top two guys in the top range. And then obviously Chet Holmgren only playing 23 minutes last game. I'd be pretty surprised if he's held under 26 to 28 minutes again here in the spot. Obviously, there was some scrutiny with the rotation decisions made for the Thunder. I think Chet gets a bounce back spot minutes wise. So those are the guys up top that I like the most. That's how I would rank them as well. Mid-range, love the Miles Turner call. Still like both of these, secondary guards and wings for the Pacers and Nesmith and Nembhard. No problem going back to Obi Toppin. But again, Alex Caruso is still one of my favorite plays. Again, talked about him in game one pretty heavily. Came through for us, 31.5 DK points. He's just a guy when he's on the floor, he's able to produce, play 28 minutes. And I think that was telling where he's at in this rotation for this series. After Wallace got bumped into the starting lineup, Caruso still playing 28.5 minutes. I think was telling that he's going to have a pretty solid role. And what we're seeing from a schematic perspective with some of these bigs losing out on some rebound opportunities. I do think there's a really strong chance they change up the rotation quite a bit. But Caruso was still benefiting from positive rebound chances. I think he had 10 or 11 rebound opportunities, 6 rebounds. So love Caruso again here. Those are the mid range guys I like the most.
All right, Jim, how about you? Anybody else that you want to target on DraftKings, maybe specifically for get different on this slate that you think are going on their own?
Sorry, for what it's worth, real quick, we did get news that Thunder doing the same starting lineup, so I figure that's worth mentioning because I know at least that was some worth confirming for me.
That's definitely worth confirming. I was very curious if they would go back to Hartenstein. I see some comments saying Hartenstein minutes still going to be low. I mean that's 1 point towards low minutes, but I do think Hartenstein will clear 20 in this game. Unless we see a very different script where that OKC, the small ball is working. I think if you don't want Hartenstein in a lineup, then you don't want Turner and you want some of those OKC wings. Again, you really want to correlate this stuff out and make sure that the game script that you're doing for this really makes sense. I might actually quickly talk about a couple of guys I'm a little bit disinterested in this tier. I think Nembhard and Nesmith are actually a pair of guys that they both had very good game ones. I'm a little bit worried about foul trouble. Both these guys can get into foul trouble. Both of them have really tough assignments. Nembhard, we saw a lot of Nembhard on Shea. We saw a lot of Nesmith on either Shea or J-Dub. Both these guys have been in and out of foul trouble at times. They seem like decent floor. They have decent floors to them. So maybe, I don't know, if you're trying to do, if you're trying to just double up, then maybe go this route. But I don't think the ceiling is there. Even though these guys are 3-point shooters, I think there's really a fair amount of risk on Nembhard and Nesmith. So I'm mostly staying away from those guys. Kyle touched briefly on Caruso. He had a great first game. Vaguely intrigued, but I actually think one name that's like a pretty decent bargain. I'm not even sure. He's at the very bottom of the screen there, Benedict Mathurin. If you're going with a build that's, if you think OKC is walking in this game, I think Mathurin's a really interesting guy. So taking a look, the Pacers have had 3 blowout losses this postseason, basically. They've only had 4 losses, 3 of them in blowouts. They win all the close games, basically, right? So in those blowouts, Mathurin has scored actual points, 23, 23, and 9. And for fantasy points, 34, 27, and 14. So the script of them getting blown out means good things for Mathurin. Usually Carlisle will turn to them if they need, a spark plug. He kind of did that in game 1, to be honest. And he had a decent outing. He had 13 fantasy points, 15 minutes. He was a -8, but he is the type of guy that I think Carlisle likes to go to kind of, get a jolt in the lineup. And say they're down 25 in the third, he's going to put Mathurin in for a chunk of time to say, hey, we're either going to cut this to 15 and I'll put the starters back in and see if they can do their magic, or it's going to be a 30-point game and Mathurin, you play the rest of the game. You're kind of, if you think OKC is going to have a solid lead at some point in this game, there's multiple paths to Mathurin getting in the game. I would pair him with someone like an Aaron Wiggins or an Isaiah Joe. They're kind of similar. I think Wiggins, I lean that direction a little bit. He's got the lower ownership, which I think is a little surprising. I think it's probably just because of cost. But this is a series that I was eyeing Aaron Wiggins in general. He's played about 30 more minutes than Joe for the postseason. Joe's been shooting a little bit better than him. But I think Wiggins is a pretty interesting matchup in this series in general for what they can throw at the Pacers. And again, if you're playing Isaiah Joe or Aaron Wiggins, you're hoping that they pop a couple threes. Both those guys are very capable of that. I would go with those guys if you're really kind of at the bottom of the barrel looking for a bargain, and I would pair them with Mathurin. Then you've got a lot of leeway up top. Then you really can build. You probably could have Shea and J-Dub in there if that's really what you want, and kind of do that OKC blowout stack type of build.
Kyle, how about you? Anything else you want to highlight before we switch to FanDuel?
Yeah, I love the Mathurin call. We talked about Jim talked about the trend so far in games where they lose with Mathurin. I think that lines up perfectly with a correlation play, and I agree completely on Isaiah Joe and Wiggins being good pieces to pair him with. I talked about Wiggins in game one. Obviously, he didn't come through, but he did play 9 minutes, which I know there was sort of a question mark after seeing him sort of falter in the rotation in that Minnesota game. But this is a spot where we do think the Thunder sort of roll here, and he's already playing 9 minutes in a close game. If he's able to play 12 to 14 minutes, he's a guy who he's not shy to shoot. He can definitely put up fantasy points in bunches there, even in limited time, and he's very cheap, 1.6. Also like the Isaiah Joe call, probably feel a bit safer about him getting a couple more minutes on a regular sort of game script play out there for Joe. But again, guy who's going to be pretty much hit or miss based on scoring upside. TJ McConnell, he got in the game pretty early, only played 16 minutes, so I still think that there's upside for TJ to play more minutes in a game that stays close. And again, another guy he's a guy who I like to chase in these showdown slates because, again, even if he only plays 16, 17 minutes, he can put up 20 plus fantasy points because he's such a good permanent producer. And then if you run good, get a few extra minutes for him, that's when you sort of see those ceiling games. And I think that's pretty much it for the guys that outlined from a value perspective. McConnell, Mathurin, Joe, Wiggins. I think obviously Wallace and Dort are still fine in that sub 5K range. Dort a little over 5K, but Wallace, yes, bad game. But again, if he's going to be on the floor and you're not going to get a ton of value from him from an offensive perspective, but be on the floor for 33 minutes at 4.8 on DraftKings, certainly worth mentioning and being in the player pool here.
All right, let's make the pivot over to FanDuel. Not much of a different conversation in comparison to, sorry if you guys can hear my cat in the background. Not much of a different conversation these days now that they have adjusted to have not only the fantasy point multiplier, but the salary multiplier at the MVP position. No longer I don't even remember what the all-star and what was the other names that they had there beside the MVP in their former format. But these days, it's pretty much the same conversation. The only thing that is different is some prices. One thing on FanDuel that I want to emphasize that I like more than DraftKings is Pascal Siakam has an even bigger price discrepancy between Jalen Williams and Halliburton and SGA. So I think he's an even stronger play over here. But Kyle, we'll keep it with you. Who is your favorite MVP? Is it SGA? And who would be your top pivots?
Yeah, definitely still SGA is the top option. But again, if you're someone who's really actively trying to avoid dupes and whatnot, and you want to get different, it's still going to be Siakam up top for me as my favorite pivot, and then Jalen Williams behind SGA. Jalen Williams, it's again mainly just because of the fact that if you're playing SGA, again, probably not building many lineups, if any, without SGA, but in the ones where you're not putting him in MVP slot, probably assuming he's going to have a down game here. If that happens, who's going to be the guy that probably has the spike scoring game? Probably be J-Dub is where I would put my money on there. So I like Jalen Williams as a pivot there if you're not playing SGA in the MVP slot. Slotting in Jalen Williams makes sense there, as well as Siakam. Probably not getting too crazy with many other guys. I mean, yeah, you can play Chet, you can play Halliburton, even though he's been a guy who's been pretty much talked about throughout the industry as not being someone people are high on for this series. And I think that's rightfully so. But again, from a game theory perspective, when you have a guy who is, theoretically the top producer most nights for this Pacers team, getting overlooked because of that narrative. And again, we haven't projected higher in the ownership because of our models, but from a narrative perspective, I think the public is lower on Halliburton for this series. And again, rightfully so. But if you want to bank on just a game theory perspective, Halliburton certainly should still be in the mix for builds.
Or are there a lot of people who are going to go, wow, best clutch player since MJ. We got to get him into our lineups.
I think people are just going to slam SGA. So
playoffs, in terms of amounts of game tying, winning, and shots within the last 2 minutes to tie or take the lead, he's literally having the most clutch playoffs ever.
He's had Kobe's amount of game winners in one postseason.
Yeah.
It's genuinely insane.
Yeah. Jim, how about you? Still SGA up top, and who would be your top pivots?
I do lean SGA. You got the optimum ownership even tighter on this side, so I lean even stronger there. And I do think it's an interesting point from Kyle though, because very few of these guys have the ceiling that Halliburton has. Now it is a nightmare matchup, but a lot of people are sharp and know that it's a nightmare matchup. Now maybe like you said, TJ, there's a fair amount of people out there also like Captain Clutch. We got to get him in there somehow. But I feel like the Sims really dominate for DFS, and the Sims are gonna not like Halliburton. It's a really tough matchup, but he does have that ceiling. Now, I saw a comment talking about the rebound chances. That is part of my worry with a Halliburton, though. Like his points were kind of floated by 10 rebounds. I think that his rebounds drop. The other guys, Neesmith and Toppin, who are highlighted as well, I could see their rebounds dropping as well. Again, that kind of ties into more minutes for Miles Turner, more minutes for Isaiah Hartenstein. If those guys aren't out there, then maybe those rebound opportunities are there. So maybe if you're pricing in more rebounds for Halliburton, you're playing him as captain, then maybe you also want to do something like that. That's a small ball script. So that means you want Wiggins. That means you want, you definitely don't want a Turner or Hartenstein. So you can overthink this stuff at times, but I think it is fun to kind of think through a script and what's going to make Halliburton pop in that captain spot. It might be some of those rebounds that come from more of a small ball lineup. But overall, FanDuel, yeah, I mean, the pricing's even really close today. So there really aren't a ton of differences between DraftKings and FanDuel. I just want to super highlight that Kason Wallace is even more expensive over here. I don't think, Kyle, I could be wrong. Maybe you shot him out, but even though he is starting again, I'm really not super high on him. He had 33 minutes and only put up 14 fantasy points last game. Even though he is starting, I really don't see him playing 33 minutes again. There are paths towards it. I just think that that's a pretty narrow path that he has to be playing well. They're hitting the glass well. It's not a blowout, so he doesn't lose minutes to the bench guys. A lot of things have to go right for Kason to be worth his value today, in my opinion. So that's a guy I'm pretty much staying away from. But overall, it's a lot of the same names. I do think Shea at the captain spot. Chet is a really interesting one. I think Chet's someone who this series could be interesting for down the stretch. I really want to see it for one game. Sometimes you miss out on the one game and, then you regret not having gone around to it. I think the minutes will be there, but I do think the Indy is maybe I'm just the world's biggest Carlisle believer, but a player like Chet, where he is in his career right now, I think the ceiling is very high for him long term. He seems like a guy who Carlisle would be able to pick on, a little bit on both ends and really be able to give him a hard time. So I'm not going to have Chet in too many lineups. I think the Siakam's a good pivot up there up top. We talked through most guys at this point. Some of the bottom of the barrel. Those indie guys like Shepard. Shepard's a guy who I'm almost never going to get to as a bargain, but I think you can do a lot better than the indie bargains because if the indie bargains are getting real minutes, the OKC guys are getting real minutes, and I like the OKC guys a lot more. So Wiggins and Joe being better than Shepard and Bryant would kind of be my take if you need a guy to slot in at a really cheap price at the bottom of the barrel.
I like it. Kyle, is there anybody else that you want to highlight here at the utility position on FanDuel? All the clear names up top in terms of optimal rates: SGA, Halliburton, Williams, Siakam, Holmgren, Neesmith, Nembhard. It's so hard to look at these prices of Neesmith, Nembhard, and Toppin and just go wow, that's the clear best value. Might as well put them with SGA and with either Siakam or Williams. And you'd think that's what everybody would be doing, but based on these projections, that's not actually the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these guys do project well. I think it is pretty easy to get these guys in lineups too, because there are a few really cheap options I think the public is going to have no problem putting into lineups. I do think, the more I look at it, especially on FanDuel, where I think with the pricing, these ownership numbers are probably going to consolidate pretty easily. I think it's pretty clear SGA, Siakam, and J-Will are going to be really, really popular. And those guys are all fantastic options. I think the best way to probably win on this slate is to just play a game script, play a game flow, whether it be the small ball or the non-small ball rotations, or just expecting a blowout one way or the other. Probably more likely on the Thunder side. And I think Jim broke it down perfectly, where if it is a spot where we're seeing increased minutes for Joe and Wiggins and Shepard and whatnot for these end of the bench guys, much would rather play these Thunder guys. I think Joe and Wiggins specifically are guys who stick out. But on the Pacers side, you have Mathurin and McConnell, who have really good price tags: $2K for Mathurin, $2.2 for McConnell on FanDuel. Like all four of those guys. So if you wanted to pair up a couple of those guys, maybe even 2 to 3 of those guys, put them in a group in lineup HQ and say, okay, have increased interest in these guys for maybe 50 out of 150 lineups if you're doing a 150 build. That's a spot where those 4 guys I think could really separate you from a lineups perspective, rather than chasing down, the Lou Dort 5 for 9 from 3 game again, or the Kaysen Wallace minutes. And yeah, sure, I think Kaysen Wallace can still be in builds, but again, I think there's just more upside with some of these guys behind him if the game specifically goes in a different way than I think what the public is expecting, based on where some of these ownership numbers look, where it sort of seems like they're just expecting this game to play straight up. And while that probably happens more often than not, those spots where I think people will really make money are when that game sort of blows out and you get some of these backbench guys to really go off.
One lineup for all the money. You're trying to get first place in the 200K to first. Kyle, will your lineup have SGA in it? Yes or no?
If I'm just doing one lineup, it's probably hard to not have SGA. But if I'm saying, okay, I'm totally fine with, getting my ass handed to me and get my ass kicked in order to say, okay, this is giving me the best chance to truly finish in that top 1% of lineups, then I would probably go away from SGA in the MVP slot alone.
Jim, how about you? One lineup to win it all. You playing SGA, yay or nay?
I am going to have him there. I'm going to differentiate, like Kyle said, through script. I think there's enough. I guess, part of it depends on how many folks you're playing with and all that. But I think I'm going to not overthink it in this series and mostly be having Shea in that captain spot.
All right, keep it with you here, Jim. Halliburton, Williams, Siakam. If you can only choose one, who's going in your lineup?
I'm going to go with J-Dub. I think the bounce back there, the 19 field goal attempts I really like. Siakam's probably a close second there. And Halliburton would be, a semi-distant third. But like Kyle said, there is leverage to that. I think it is such, we talked about before the series, his lowest usage games coming against the Thunder this season. It's not like it's just a bad matchup or just a bad game. There really is a fair amount there that is going against Halliburton. It's a pretty big uphill battle. So I'll go J-Dub 1 and Siakam kind of 1A.
Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Siakam just by a smidge. I think both those guys are really, really close. But I do think from a building perspective, I think probably having 2 of those guys with SGA in most lineups anyway, and it would be Siakam and J Will for me. But I'll go Siakam slightly by hair.
All right, now everybody below that, who's breaking the slate today, Kyle?
I mean, breaking the slate again, I think you're going to find somebody in these absolute 2K, 3K sub range where they have that big game, and that probably most of the time comes from a weird game script. So I'm going to go TJ McConnell. Again, I don't think he's the guy to go out and score 50 DK points, but again, I think breaking a slate on a showdown is you're going to have 2, 3, 4 of the top scorers, and you're going to have that one guy that is making your lineup a little bit unique, and he has the big game. I think I'm going to go with McConnell for that one today.
Yeah, I did a build that I really like that has Hartenstein, McConnell, and Mathurin in it because I just feel like those are the 3 that really have high point per minute potential if this turns into a blowout. Jim, how about you? Anybody cheaper than Siakam? Who's breaking the slate?
You said one of the names I'm looking at, Mathurin. I think Mathurin is the guy. I think there is definitely blowout potential. Talked about how good he has been in these Pacers blowouts. And I think there's even paths to him having a really good game, even if Indiana's able to hang around. So I like his versatility there at such a good bargain. Really kind of gives you leverage to get some of the big guns in there. So I'll say Mathurin is the guy today.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that even if it's close, if he hits his first 2 or 3 3-pointers, he absolutely could be in there for extended minutes as well. About 7 minutes to lock here. If you're playing some NBA tonight, make sure you get your lineups in. There does actually look like there's a chance we could get a little bit of overlay in that 200K to first tournament over on DraftKings. It looks like there's about 2,500 spots left open with less than 10 minutes to go. And with a $25 entry fee, that's not like that's something that's going to necessarily just go super quick. But if you got any questions, get them into the RotoGrinders live stream Discord chat. Get them into the YouTube chat. If you're watching us on YouTube, Sunday night NBA Finals, free content. All we ask is that you hit that like button for us, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let's start getting to some of these questions. Bill T says he expects Holmgren to have a bigger role, and he thinks SGA does less and others are stepping up today. What do you think of that approach, Kyle? Do you think maybe the SGA is going to have an off day, but the rest of the Thunder team could carry him?
I mean, it's always a tough guy to bet on for a down game here for SGA. But again, if you are building around that, or maybe you anticipate a different scheme in terms of defensive approach for the Pacers, I think that's a good way to build lineups. But again, I do think that for showdown reasons, what you think is going to happen versus what could happen and what could lead to a strong lineup are two completely different things. I would not personally be betting on an SGA down game, but I think there's plenty of ways to build a handful of different lineups with that sort of narrative in mind.
On that note, Jim, what do you think about the strategy of fading the top captains and just going with like a Jalen Williams, Pascal Siakam, Chet Holmgren, going with a full set of mid-tier guys and just hope that nobody has 50, 60 fantasy points today and a whole bunch of guys have 40?
Man, maybe I'm stubborn here, but I just see the like he could take 6 fewer field goal attempts, still be at 24. That could be a little bit more efficient because he's not forcing it, and those could be assists now. He had a couple of steals in the first game. I think he could, but he didn't have any blocks. I just his floor is so insanely high, and we've seen in the postseason his minutes are higher. I am struggling to get to a path of I get that you can really leverage it and not have Shea, and that because a lot of people are probably thinking exactly what I'm thinking of is he is in a tier like all by himself. So I very much get the game theory of it, but I personally am going to try and outthink the people who are out thinking it with Shea and just keep rocking Shea as the main spot for me.
I think we have hit all of our questions already. There was one more that I wanted to find. I'll scroll up from the YouTube chat because we had answered a few of these already. But there's one that I wanted to make sure I got, and there we go. One lineup, Kyle. You going Caruso or Hartenstein?
I'm gonna go back to my boy Caruso. I get that. We're probably gonna see a good chance that Hartenstein plays a couple extra minutes here, but again, I still don't think we're gonna be seeing him in the mid 20s or anything like that. Both guys can definitely get it done on a permanent basis. I like Caruso to play about 9-10 more minutes on average here with the projections there. So I will go with Caruso.
In a vacuum, absolutely. Just like Kyle said, Caruso, and just kind of want to make sure you also consider the lineup that you have, going back to what Jim said. If you have Miles Turner in there, you're probably going to maybe then go Isaiah Hartenstein.
Yep.
But otherwise, unless you're playing for a specific blowout, unless you're have Turner in there, Caruso, definitely the guy. I think that'll do it. Good luck tonight in everyone's NBA contests. One more thing, of course. Kyle, who wins the game?
I'm going with the Thunder. I know I said Thunder in 5 last game, trying to be very confident in the take. I think Thunder in 6 was the more likely outcome, but I wanted to be a little bit more emphatic with my take, so I said 5. I think Thunder in 5 is still live, but I'm going to go with Thunder in this one.
Jim, how about you? Who do you think wins, and who do you think wins the series, since we didn't have you on last week?
So I will say Pacers in 7, but I'll say the Thunder get it done tonight. I think we kind of see a bunch of zigzagging, and then I kind of trust Indy more if it gets the further in the series it goes. So I'll take the Thunder tonight, but I think it could be a decent game. Like that spread of 11 is pretty big. Yeah. So I'll take Thunder tonight, but Indy in 7 for the series.
I got Thunder tonight as well, but with that big spread, I don't mind the idea of betting on Indiana here as well. Like, if I didn't put any sports bets out for NBA, but I think if I had more time beforehand and was really sitting down to do this, I would probably try and play my DFS lineups blowout heavy and then bet on Indiana.
Yeah,
would be kind of how I'd be looking to go about this one today. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. We will be back for Game 3. We'll also be back tomorrow for the MLB slate. You'll have Dean for Grinders Live, and it's either me or Cards hosting Crunch Time. So we will see you then. Smash that like button on your way out. On behalf of myself, Jim, and Kyle, we will see you next time.